She finds a man unconscious in the snow, not knowing that he is a powerful CEO. Hello everyone. Before we start today's story, I have a small request. Please subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new video on our channel. Your support means a lot to us. Where are you watching from? Leave your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. The snow had begun falling before sunset, but by midnight it had swallowed the entire valley in white. Harper Dawson pushed open the wooden door of the cabin, the hinges groaning against the wind. She stepped out with her fur-lined hood pulled low, breath turning to frost as she checked the traps along the tree line. Nights like this were dangerous. One wrong step, one slip, and the cold would devour a person before they could even scream. Her boots sank deep into the powder as she crossed the ridge. The air bit at her cheeks, sharp and merciless. She focused on the familiar rhythm. Breathe, step, check. Breathe, step, check. But then something, a shape, broke the rhythm. A darker mound of snow where the land should have been smooth. Harper froze. For a heartbeat, she wasn't even sure it was real. Then she saw a hand. Bare. Blue. Still. Her stomach dropped. She rushed forward, brushing away layers of snow until a face appeared. Ashen, ice crystals clinging to his lashes. He looked impossibly tall, even curled on the ground, his clothes torn, shoulder bleeding through the fabric. Harper shakily placed 2 fingers on his neck. His pulse was faint, but still there. Consider yourself lucky, she muttered under her breath, voice tight with urgency. You picked the perfect night to die out here. She hooked her arms under his and pulled. The weight was brutal. The wind slapped against her back as if pushing her away, telling her to leave him. But Harper gritted her teeth, boots slipping, and dragged him 1 agonizing inch at a time toward the faint glow of her cabin windows. By the time she shoved the door open with her hip, her arms were shaking. Rose, her grandmother, wasn't home, staying overnight at a distant neighbor's place. So Harper moved alone, fast, efficient. She rolled the stranger onto the cot near the fire, tore away the frozen fabric, and worked with practiced skill. Alcohol on the wound, strips of linen, firm pressure to stop the bleeding. Then she threw 2 extra logs into the fireplace, heat blooming across the room. Hours passed. Then, finally, he stirred. His lips were cracked. His voice was barely there. Water. Harper exhaled, relieved he could still speak. She grabbed a wooden cup, filled it with steaming pine needle tea, bitter, medicinal, life-saving, and gently lifted his head. Slow, she whispered. You'll choke. He drank in small, shaky sips. When the cup lowered, he blinked at her, dazed, confused, still caught between consciousness and darkness. Harper crouched beside him, steady and calm. Now, she said quietly, can you tell me who you are? A long pause. His brows pulled together as if searching through empty drawers in his mind. I'm Adrian, he finally said, voice rough. Adrian Blackwell. Nothing else. No memory of how he ended up buried in snow. No memory of what chased him there. Just a name hanging in the warm air of a tiny cabin in the middle of a storm. The fire had burned low, casting a faint amber glow across the cabin walls, when Adrian stirred again. Harper noticed it first, the slight tightening of his jaw, the way his hand crept toward the pocket of his coat, as if led by instinct rather than memory. His fingertips brushed fabric, searched, hesitated. Then his other hand moved, checking the opposite pocket, then his jeans.s. Harper watched the moment realization settled in his eyes. My wallet, he rasped. His voice was raw, cracked from cold. My phone. My watch, they're all gone. The words landed with a dull heaviness. Harper didn't need more explanation. A man doesn't collapse half dead in a blizzard for no reason. A man doesn't lose every personal item by accident. Someone had taken his belongings. And someone had left him to die in the snow. He wasn't a lost traveler. He wasn't a hiker who misjudged a trail. He had likely been robbed. Abandoned. Thrown into the storm like trash. She swallowed, feeling a ripple of unease. Bringing a stranger into the cabin wasn't her usual way, especially one who came out of nowhere carrying danger like a shadow behind him. But Harper wasn't the kind of woman who left people to freeze. She had pulled him back from the edge of death. That alone told her enough. Don't think about it now, she murmured quietly. You need rest. The effort of moving drained him. His eyes fluttered closed again, and he sank into sleep, his breathing falling into a heavy rhythm. Harper stayed awake long into the night, listening to the storm gnawing at the forest. The man lying unconscious in her cabin wasn't just unlucky. Someone had meant for him not to survive. And that thought lingered in her mind, sharp and cold as the wind outside. 3 days later, the cabin door flung open with a gust of icy air. Rose Dawson stepped inside, her boots heavy with packed snow. She stomped twice out of habit, then froze. Her gaze locked immediately on the stranger in their home. Adrian propped up slightly, body full of wounds and bandages. "What in heaven's name?" "Harper Dawson," Rose said, voice low and brimming with suspicion. "Who is that?" Harper rose from beside the stove. "I found him in the storm, Grandma. He was unconscious. Freezing. I couldn't just leave him." Rose's eyes narrowed into hard slits. "Or pretending. We don't know what kind of man he is. People don't end up half dead in the middle of the wild unless something's wrong." "If he were dangerous," Harper answered softly but firmly, "he wouldn't have been lying out there dying." Adrian remained silent, guilt flickering across his face. He looked as lost as she'd found him, someone searching his own mind and finding only emptiness. Rose exhaled sharply through her nose. "Alaska is unforgiving, Harper. You cannot trust a stranger just because he shivers." "I know," Harper said, "but I'm not turning him out to freeze. He stays until he's well enough to stand." A long pause stretched between them, filled with the crackle of the fire. Finally, Rose sighed. "Fine." She set her bag down. "But I'm watching him like a hawk." There was no mention of suspects, no revelation of who had harmed him, only a shared, unspoken understanding. Whoever left him in the snow had not wanted him alive. And until Adrian recovered his memories, this cabin, small, warm, and isolated from the world, would be the only shelter he had. The storm season settled over the mountains like a heavy blanket, and days bled into weeks inside the small wooden cabin. During that time, Adrian regained strength slowly, first sitting up without help, then standing with a hand braced on the table, and eventually walking short distances across the room. Life in the wilderness offered no shortcuts. Every step toward recovery was earned. Harper taught him the basics in her patient, quiet way. She placed an axe in his hands, guiding his grip. "Don't fight the wood," she said. "Let the weight do the work." At first, the blade barely nicked the logs, but soon Adrian learned the rhythm, the lift, the drop, the satisfying crack of wood splitting open. She showed him how to build a fire from tinder and dry bark, how to coax a spark into a flame, how to breathe gently so the embers didn't scatter. He listened more than he spoke, absorbing every detail like it mattered. And in this place, it did. Meals were simple: pine needle tea, a venison stew simmered for hours, root vegetables she stored underground. He grimaced the first time the bitter tea touched his tongue, but Harper only raised an eyebrow. "It keeps you warm. That's what matters." He drank it anyway. Outside, snow kept falling, thick and endless. With the world buried under white, the cabin felt even smaller, pushing the two of them into the same shared space. Harper wasn't used to living with anyone. Adrian clearly wasn't used to relying on anyone. Yet the days passed with a strange steadiness, like two mismatched pieces gradually learning how to fit. Sometimes Adrian would stare at the frost-covered window, his brows knitting as if something inside him ached to surface. Bits of memory slipped through, shadows of places, flashes of a different life, a sense of urgency he couldn't trace. Harper never pressed him. She simply worked beside him, cooked near him, sat across from him as he tried to remember who he was. One evening, she was sewing a torn sleeve from one of his jackets. The lamplight softened the sharp planes of his face as he watched her hands move, steady, practiced, gentle in a way he had never encountered in the corporate world he came from. Something inside him loosened, as if the warmth of the cabin had melted a part of the ice still clinging to his mind. "I remembered something today," he said quietly. Harper didn't look up immediately. "What kind of something?" Adrian hesitated, fingers curling around the edge of the blanket draped over his knees. "I'm not a criminal. Or a drifter. I remembered my name. And more than that." He drew in a slow breath. "I'm the head of Blackwell Industries. A CEO. A billionaire, technically." The word felt strange here, out of place in a room lit by firelight and filled with the scent of pine wood. Harper finally lifted her eyes, calm as ever. "Oh." A tiny shrug. "Nice title. but it won't help you survive in Alaska. He let out a faint breath, almost a laugh, almost disbelief. She didn't react the way people usually did to wealth or status. There was no awe, no calculation, no shift in her posture. She simply accepted it as another detail, no more important than his height or the color of his eyes. And that unsettled him in a way he couldn't name. For the first time, Adrian saw his old life from a distance. Glass towers, private jets, a world built on power and pressure. Here, none of it mattered. Not to the woman sewing his coat. Not to the mountains outside their door. Not to the wild, quiet existence he was beginning to understand. Something unspoken formed between them. A connection shaped not by words, but by shared space, shared silence, and the strange comfort of not needing to pretend. In this isolated corner of the world, beneath the relentless snowfall, a bond began to take root. Quiet, reluctant, and undeniable. The fire crackled softly, casting long amber shadows across the small cabin. Harper set aside the jacket she had been mending, sensing that Adrian wasn't finished. His posture had shifted, tense, upright, as if some invisible thread inside him had finally snapped taut. He exhaled, slow and shaky. "There's more," he murmured. Harper didn't speak. She simply watched him with steady, grounded eyes, the kind that made telling the truth feel strangely safe. Adrian's gaze drifted to the flames, as though the memories were hiding in the flicker of light. "I remember why I came to Alaska," he said. "There was a mining deal, a gold reserve. Huge. The competition for it was brutal." His jaw tightened. "And I remember. Marcus." "Marcus?" Harper prompted gently. "My assistant," he said. "Marcus Hale. Someone I trusted. Someone who managed everything for me." His voice dropped lower, rougher. "I see it now. The hotel lounge. A drink he handed me. I remember the burn in my throat, the room spinning, and then, nothing." A harsh breath escaped him as another flash of memory struck. Snow. Cold. A distant voice fading. Hands pushing him. A fall into darkness. "He drugged me," Adrian whispered. "And he dumped me out there. In the middle of a storm. He wanted me dead." Harper's fingers curled into a tight fist on her lap. Her reaction was immediate, visceral, the kind of outrage reserved for cruelty she couldn't stand. "That's not betrayal," she said quietly, her voice trembling with contained fury. "That's attempted murder." Adrian didn't disagree. He simply stared into the fire, the truth carving deeper lines into his expression. "I don't know how long I lay out there. But if you hadn't found me." He didn't finish the sentence. The silence that followed was thick and heavy, broken only by the wind scratching against the cabin walls. Harper leaned back slightly, studying him. "So what will you do now?" Adrian swallowed. The answer was clear even as fear flickered behind his eyes. "I have to go back," he said. "To New York. To my company. Marcus is running Blackwell Industries in my absence. If I don't return," he shook his head, "I'll lose everything." The corporate world, power, betrayal, ambition, felt impossibly far from the wooden floors and pine-scented air around them. And yet, the danger he described was real, looming just beyond the safety of this mountain. Harper didn't argue, but the tightening of her jaw revealed enough. She hated the idea of him walking back toward the place that had tried to erase him. Still, she understood. He couldn't stay hidden in the snow forever. Adrian looked at her then, really looked. "I wouldn't even be alive if it weren't for you." Harper shook her head. "You survived because you wanted to. I just kept the fire going." But despite her calm tone, something unspoken passed between them. A fragile awareness that the moment he left this cabin, everything would change. And he would have to face the world that had tried to bury him without a trace. The morning Adrian left, the sky was the same muted gray that had lingered for days, heavy with snow that refused to stop falling. The world outside felt painfully quiet, too quiet for goodbye. Harper stood by the cabin door, coat pulled tight, watching Adrian secure the sled and the restless dogs that pawed at the ground. He moved slower than usual, as if every buckle and knot was a delay he desperately needed. When he finally approached her, frost clung to the ends of his hair, and his breath curled in soft white clouds between them. He hesitated for a moment, then slipped a silver ring from his finger, the only thing he had left when she found him buried in the snow. He placed it gently into her hand. "This is all I have from before," he said quietly. "Keep it." And Harper, His voice cracked just enough for her to hear what he couldn't fully say. Please wait for me. Harper's chest tightened. She closed her fingers around the cold ring, grounding herself in its weight. Go, she whispered, steady but trembling underneath. Your city is waiting. He nodded, though his eyes lingered on her as if he were memorizing her face. Every freckle, every shade of gold in her hair. Then he turned, climbed onto the sled, and the dogs surged forward. Within seconds, he became a small dark shape swallowed by white. And then he was gone. For a long moment afterward, Harper couldn't move. The cold bit through her clothes, but the emptiness in her chest was sharper. Eventually, she forced herself back inside. Life did not slow for longing, not in Alaska. Days passed, then weeks. She fell back into the rhythms that had shaped her entire life. Chopping wood, boiling water from melted snow, checking traps, patching leaks in the cabin roof. Every task kept her hands busy, but none quieted the thoughts circling her mind. Was Adrian safe? Had he reached the city? Had Marcus discovered he was alive? The silence stretched unbearably, filling the small cabin until it felt like a third presence in the room. One late afternoon, while Harper was stacking logs beside the door, the dogs outside began barking. She stepped out, squinting through the pale light, expecting maybe a fox, or nothing at all. But a man stood at the tree line. A stranger. Heavy coat, frost-covered boots, breath fogging the air. He held out an envelope. For you, he said simply. He's waiting. Harper's pulse kicked hard once, then again. Before she could ask who he was, or where he came from, or what exactly Adrian wanted, the man turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving only the letter trembling in her hand. Harper left Alaska quietly. She hugged Rose goodbye, promised she would return soon, and stepped into the early winter morning. The air bit at her cheeks, but she walked with purpose, down the narrow path, past the frozen stream, toward the place where the small bush plane would land. Hours later, the world of snow and pine was gone. New York greeted her like a shock. Noise, heat, smoke, towers of glass. Everything felt too bright, too fast, too close. Harper kept her head down as she followed the address written in Adrian's letter. Her boots clicked awkwardly on the marble floors of the lobby. People in tailored suits brushed past her, but no one stopped her. No one questioned why a woman dressed in worn denim and a mountain coat had walked into Blackwell Industries. When the elevator doors slid open on the top floor, she froze. Adrian stood there. Not the injured, half-frozen man she had dragged through a blizzard. Not the confused stranger with fragments of memory. This Adrian was steady, confident, whole. Yet when he saw her, something in his expression cracked open. Relief, disbelief, a quiet ache. Harper, he breathed. She stepped forward slowly, almost cautiously. You look different. He gave a small, tired smile. I had to be. A beat of silence settled between them, heavy with everything left unsaid during those long weeks apart. Come with me, he said gently. He led her to his office, floor-to-ceiling windows, a skyline that glittered like stars over steel. But Adrian didn't sit behind the desk. Instead, he stopped a few feet in front of her, as if unsure how close he was allowed to be. I used the last pieces of my reputation to gather evidence, he began quietly. Marcus, everything he did, it's all out in the open now. He's out of the company. Harper watched him, her face unreadable. I filed charges, Adrian continued. Every betrayal is being handled in court. Another pause, another slow breath. And I'm back in control of Blackwell Industries. Harper nodded once. Good. You should be. Adrian looked away for a moment, just long enough for her to see the exhaustion underneath his polished exterior. Then he reached to his desk and held out a thin folder. Inside were documents stamped with the name. Dawson Initiative. Harper blinked. My family name? It's a nonprofit, Adrian said, voice low. To support remote regions. Communities like the one that saved me. Something warm flickered in Harper's chest, but she kept her expression steady. A long moment passed. Then Adrian stepped closer, slowly, almost cautiously, his eyes searching hers. I never got to say this in Alaska, he said. His voice trembled at the edges. Harper, I love you. The words hung between them like a fragile thread. Harper didn't look away. She didn't flinch. She simply breathed in deeply, grounding herself as she always did. Steady, strong, controlled. Finally, she whispered, then prove it. The room went quiet. The city hummed far below. And Adrian stood there, swallowing hard, knowing this was only the beginning. Harper returned to Alaska a few days later. The snow greeted her like an old friend, brushing softly against her coat as she walked the familiar trail back to the cabin. Everything looked the same: frozen pines, distant peaks, the quiet hum of winter. But she was different. Some nights, Harper sat by the fire, fingers curled around a warm tin cup, and without meaning to, she smiled. Tiny, private smiles. Smiles that came from remembering a voice, a look, a promise that had not been spoken but had been felt. Rose watched her quietly. The old woman didn't ask anything. She didn't need to. Months passed. Winter dragged on, then loosened its grip. The days grew longer. Life returned to its old rhythm. Until one morning, footsteps crunched outside the cabin. Harper opened the door, and suddenly his heart skipped a beat. Adrian stood there, not in a tailored coat, not polished, not powerful, just a man, tired from travel, bundled awkwardly, cheeks red from the wind. "I'm back," he said softly. And he stayed. For months. He lived in the small village with nothing but determination and bare hands. He learned to hunt, missing every shot at first, then gradually hitting his mark. He learned to split logs, poorly, unevenly, until blisters turned into calluses. He worked alongside the locals, hauling supplies, mending roofs, carrying firewood. He endured the biting cold, the long nights, the silence of the wilderness. He laughed with the children, listened to the elders, ate simple meals, slept in simple quarters. Bit by bit, the man from Blackwall Towers disappeared. And Harper saw it all. She watched him stumble, learn, grow, change. Watched him shed the world that once defined him. Watched him choose this place. Not because he had to, but because she was here. Then came the night of the Northern Lights. The sky erupted, green, violet, gold, like the world itself was breathing light. They stood on the ridge together, snow crunching beneath their boots, breath rising in soft white clouds. Adrian turned to her, voice trembling with something more than cold. "Harper, may I stay? Not for a night, not for a season, not as a guest, but as a man who finally knew who felt like home." Harper held his gaze for a long moment. Her heartbeat steady, her expression calm. Then she nodded. The aurora shimmered above them, drifting like curtains made of light. And the story ends there. Two people choosing a future not defined by one world or the other, but by the bridge they built between them, between Alaska's wild silence and New York's blinding brilliance. A life made of both.